Little girl cried, "Stepmother, please let me go to school." Suddenly, Millionaire appeared and said, "The desperate plea of a child denied her fundamental right to education echoes through the halls of injustice." Her tearful begging would soon trigger an unexpected encounter that would change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. On a rain-slicked Monday morning in the village of Windmere Hollow, 7-year-old Mary Johnson pressed her small face against the cold iron gate, watching other children hurry toward the distant schoolhouse. The rain pattered against her worn coat, but she barely noticed, transfixed by the sight of freedom walking away in muddy boots and colorful raincoats. Her fingers clung to a battered book, her most precious possession, while her heart pounded with a longing so fierce it almost hurt. "Stepmother, please let me go to school," she whispered, her breath fogging the cold metal bars. Behind her, Jennifer Johnson stood in the doorway of their modest home, crisp and composed in her tailored coat. The stepmother's eyes narrowed at the sight of the child's yearning. Without a word, she retreated inside, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. Mary turned at the sound, hope flickering briefly in her eyes before dying as she followed Jennifer indoors. The sitting room felt oppressively quiet compared to the lively chatter she imagined filling the schoolhouse. Rain streaked down the windows like tears as Jennifer drew the curtains tight with a decisive snap, shutting out both the storm and the view of children learning. "You're too delicate, Mary," she said, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her sleeve. "Your father may have indulged your fancies before he traveled for work, but I know what's best." Her voice carried the practiced patience of someone explaining something obvious to a particularly slow child. "You'll stay home and learn what matters, silence and usefulness." Mary clutched her book tighter, feeling the worn edges press into her palms. She had read it 7 times already, a gift from her real mother before she passed. The pages held adventures she could only dream of experiencing. "But Mrs. Brown said I could join mid-term," Mary ventured, her voice barely audible above the rain. "She said I was clever enough to catch up quickly." Jennifer's expression hardened. Linda Brown should mind her own business. The teacher has no right interfering in family matters. She took the book from Mary's hands, placing it high on a shelf. "You'll help me with household duties instead. That's education enough for a girl in your position." Mary's shoulders slumped as she watched her stepmother stride away. Jennifer's voice was as unyielding as the storm outside, casting the child into a world of shadowed quiet and unmet dreams. But deep inside, where even Jennifer couldn't reach, a tiny flame of determination continued to burn, waiting for the smallest breath of opportunity to grow. As Mary turned away from the iron gate, her small shoulders slumping in defeat, the sudden rumble of an approaching vehicle made her pause. Through the curtain of rain, a sleek black car glided to a stop beside her, its polished surface gleaming despite the gloomy weather. Mary Johnson clutched her battered book tighter against her chest, uncertain whether to run back to the house or remain where she stood. The tinted window slid down with a soft mechanical purr, revealing Sarah Davis, the wealthiest woman in the county. Her elegant features were framed by silver-streaked dark hair, and her eyes, sharp and assessing, studied Mary with an intensity that made the child feel both seen and transparent at once. "Hello there," Sarah said, her cultured voice carrying easily over the patter of raindrops. "You're Mary, aren't you?" The girl nodded, rainwater dripping from her hair onto the already sodden pages of her book. She had heard whispers about Sarah Davis, the mysterious widow who lived in the grand estate on the hill, rarely seen at village gatherings, subject of endless speculation among Windmere Hollow's residents. "I've been watching you standing here every morning this week," Sarah continued, her expression softening slightly. "You want to be in there with the others, don't you?" Mary glanced back toward the distant schoolhouse, where children were disappearing through its welcoming doors. Her heart ached with longing. "My stepmother says I'm too delicate," she whispered, the words nearly lost in the rain. something flickered across Sarah's face. Recognition, perhaps, or a shadow of old pain. She leaned forward, her gaze never leaving Mary's face. "Mary, would you like to come to school with me?" 5 simple words, yet they fell upon the girl like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Mary's eyes widened, her grip on the book loosening in shock. "You mean today?" she asked, hardly daring to believe. Sarah nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Today, tomorrow, every day. Education isn't a privilege to be withheld, it's a right." Behind them, the curtain in the Johnson household twitched, Jennifer's silhouette visible for a moment before disappearing. Mary saw it and hesitated, fear momentarily eclipsing hope. "She won't allow it," Mary said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Let me worry about that," Sarah replied with quiet determination. "Some battles are worth fighting." In that moment, hope flared inside Mary, a hope so bright it eclipsed the rain and the fear and the years of being told she was too fragile for the world. She didn't yet understand that this chance encounter would set in motion a journey that would upend everything Windmere Hollow thought it knew, including the carefully guarded secrets that bound these 3 lives together. Jennifer Johnson's eyes flashed with cold fury when she learned of Sarah's offer. The composed facade she maintained in public cracked momentarily as she gripped Mary's thin wrist and marched her through the front door of their modest home. Rain dripped from Mary's coat onto the polished floor, each droplet seeming to fuel Jennifer's mounting anger. "What were you thinking, speaking to that woman?" Jennifer hissed, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "Sarah Davis has no business interfering in our affairs." Mary stood trembling, her small fingers still clutching the battered book she carried everywhere. "She just asked if I wanted to go to school," she whispered. "You will not embarrass this family or me," Jennifer said, leaning down until her face was inches from Mary's. "No more talk of school. Your mother was always filling your head with nonsense about education. You're too delicate for such things." That night, Mary lay awake listening to the rain hammer against her window, tears silently soaking her pillow. She thought of the schoolhouse in the distance, of the children with their books and laughter, and of the mysterious wealthy woman who had shown her more kindness in one moment than her stepmother had in years. The following morning brought an unexpected turn. The postman delivered an official-looking envelope addressed to Jennifer. Mary watched from the staircase as her stepmother's hands trembled while opening it. Inside were enrollment papers for Windmere Hollow Elementary, complete with Mary's name and details. A handwritten note stated that all fees had been paid in full by an anonymous sponsor. "This is outrageous!" Jennifer's voice echoed through the house as she crumpled the papers in her fist. She immediately placed a call to the school's administration office, demanding to know who had authorized this. The secretary merely confirmed that everything was in order and that Mary Johnson was expected to begin classes the following Monday. By afternoon, whispers traveled through Windmere Hollow like wildfire. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery gave Mary an extra biscuit when Jennifer wasn't looking. Mr. Collins at the post office winked knowingly. Everyone seemed to have heard about Sarah Davis's intervention and the mysterious school sponsorship. Jennifer's grip on her household tightened in response. She assigned Mary additional chores, keeping her busy from dawn until dusk. The curtains remained drawn and visitors were turned away. But beneath her controlled exterior, fear was taking root. Fear that secrets long buried might finally surface. "You may attend," she finally told Mary that evening, her voice brittle. "But remember who you are and where you come from. Some things are better left unsaid." Mary nodded silently, but inside, hope flickered like a small, persistent flame that not even Jennifer's cold words could extinguish. Mary Johnson clutched her worn notebook as she stepped into Windmere Hollow Elementary for the first time. The hallway seemed endless, lined with curious eyes that followed her every move. Her heart raced beneath her faded dress, a hand-me-down that hung slightly too large on her small frame. "Children, please welcome our new student," announced Mrs. Linda Brown, her voice firm yet warm as she guided Mary to the front of the classroom. The teacher's keen eyes took in Mary's threadbare shoes and nervous posture, But more importantly, she noticed the spark of intelligence that flickered behind the child's hesitant gaze. Mary slid into her assigned seat, acutely aware of the whispers rippling through the room. "That's the Johnson girl," someone murmured. "The one who never went to school before." Mrs. Brown tapped her ruler against the chalkboard, silencing the chatter. "Open your arithmetic books to page 43, she instructed, giving Mary an encouraging nod as she placed the textbook on her desk. During morning lessons, Mary's hand shot up repeatedly, her answers quick and thoughtful. The teacher's eyebrows rose slightly with each correct response, a subtle smile forming at the corners of her mouth. This child clearly possessed a natural aptitude that had been waiting to emerge. At midday break, Mary sat alone beneath an oak tree in the schoolyard, unwrapping the modest lunch Sarah Davis had secretly provided. She was savoring her first bite when a shadow fell across her lap. "Nice lunch, Charity Case," sneered Robert Smith, his mischievous eyes gleaming as he stood over her with two friends in tow. The council member's son was known throughout the village for his sharp tongue. "Did the mysterious rich lady buy that for you too?" Mary's cheeks flushed crimson, but she kept her gaze fixed on her food. The boy circled her, his voice carrying across the yard. "My father says people should earn their place, not have it handed to them," he continued, emboldened by his friend's snickering. Mary's fingers trembled, but she slowly closed her lunch pail and stood to face him. "I earned my place by passing the same entrance test you did," she replied quietly, her voice barely audible yet unwavering. Robert's smirk faltered momentarily before he shrugged and walked away, leaving Mary standing alone but upright. When afternoon lessons resumed, Mrs. Brown assigned a reading passage. As Mary's clear voice filled the room, reciting complex sentences with unexpected fluency, even Robert glanced up in surprise. The teacher nodded approvingly, recognizing the determination behind the girl's shy exterior. That evening, walking home through Windmere Hollow's winding lanes, Mary held her head higher than when she'd arrived. She had survived her first day, and tomorrow she would return to prove herself again. Jennifer Johnson waited exactly 3 days before making her move. On Thursday morning, she marched into Windmere Hollow Elementary with a carefully rehearsed story about Mary's sudden fever and delicate constitution. Her voice never wavered as she signed the withdrawal papers, her signature a perfect flourish of authority. "I did warn you she wasn't strong enough," she told the school secretary with practiced concern. Her poor mother had the same fragility. Mary spent that afternoon, curled by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass, while her stepmother locked her school books in the hallway cabinet. The small girl traced invisible words on the foggy pane, her fingers remembering the feel of chalk on slate, her heart aching for the brief taste of freedom she'd experienced. As evening shadows lengthened across the village, a knock at the door announced Linda Brown's arrival. The teacher stood on the threshold, her umbrella dripping onto the welcome mat, determination evident in her stance. "Mrs. Johnson, I've come to discuss Mary's absence," she said, clutching a folder of assignments. "Her work shows remarkable promise. I can't help but question this sudden illness." Jennifer's smile tightened as she reluctantly invited Mrs. Brown inside. The two women faced each other in the sitting room, their polite words barely masking the tension between them. "Mary needs structure and discipline, not false hope," Jennifer insisted, pouring tea with steady hands. "Education beyond basics will only fill her head with inappropriate aspirations." Mrs. Brown leaned forward. "Every child deserves the chance to learn. Mary especially shows." "I know what's best for my household," Jennifer cut in, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This is a family matter, Mrs. Brown. I suggest you remember your place." The warning hung in the air between them. When the teacher finally left, her shoulders slumped with defeat. Jennifer closed the door with quiet triumph. Upstairs, Mary buried her face in her pillow to muffle her sobs. The brief joy of school, of belonging somewhere, of having her thoughts valued, seemed cruelly snatched away. She cried until no more tears would come, exhaustion finally pulling her toward fitful sleep. Just before dawn, a soft tap at her window startled her awake. A small stone had struck the glass. Below, in the misty garden, stood a village boy she recognized from school, clutching an envelope. He placed it carefully on the windowsill before disappearing into the fog. With trembling fingers, Mary unfolded the letter. Elegant handwriting invited her to Sarah Davis's estate for private lessons in literature and mathematics every afternoon at 3. The note concluded with a postscript that made her heart leap. "Your mother would have wanted this for you." Mary Johnson stood frozen at the entrance of the Davis estate's library, her small fingers clutching the doorframe. The vast room stretched before her, walls lined with leather-bound volumes reaching toward the ornate ceiling. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dancing across dust motes that swirled in the air like tiny stars. "Come in, child," Sarah Davis called softly from a reading nook nestled between two towering bookshelves. The wealthy woman sat surrounded by carefully selected books, her elegant posture softened by genuine warmth in her eyes. Mary took tentative steps forward, her worn shoes silent against the plush carpet. This hidden world was everything the Johnson household was not: inviting, peaceful, filled with possibility. The scent of aged paper and leather bindings wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. "I've chosen these for our first lesson," Sarah explained, gesturing to the stack beside her. "But you may explore any book that calls to you." The girl's eyes widened as she ran her fingers reverently across the spines. "I'm allowed to choose?" Sarah nodded, a shadow of old pain crossing her features. She recognized in Mary's hesitation the same hunger she had witnessed in Anna's eyes decades ago. A brilliant mind denied its rightful nourishment. Their lessons unfolded by candlelight in the early evenings, carefully timed to avoid Jennifer's suspicion. Mary absorbed knowledge with astonishing speed, devouring mathematics, literature, and science with equal enthusiasm. Her delicate frame seemed to grow stronger with each new idea. As if knowledge itself provided sustenance her stepmother had denied. "You remind me so much of someone I knew," Sarah whispered one evening, watching Mary puzzle through a complex problem. The philanthropist rarely spoke of the past, but something about the child's determined expression unlocked memories she'd kept buried. "Who?" Mary asked, looking up from her work. "Someone very dear to me," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. Someone who deserved better than the world allowed. For Sarah, these secret lessons were more than charity. Each moment spent guiding Mary's education was a step toward healing old wounds, wounds inflicted by her own silence years ago when Anna Johnson's dreams had been similarly crushed. The wealthy woman had failed her friend once. She would not fail her daughter. As weeks passed, Mary blossomed under Sarah's tutelage. The library became their sanctuary, a place where the girl could shed the weight of her stepmother's restrictions and simply be the student she was meant to be. "Tomorrow we'll start poetry," Sarah announced, marking their progress in a leather journal. What remained unspoken between them was the growing bond, a connection that transcended teacher and pupil, becoming something like family. In the dim glow of her bedside lamp, Mary Johnson hunched over scraps of paper, her small fingers gripping a pencil as if it were a lifeline. Night after night, she filled these pages with stories that transported her far from Windmere Hollow. Sarah Davis had begun slipping these precious sheets to her during their secret lessons, along with encouraging words that made Mary's heart swell with possibility. "Write what burns inside you," Sarah had whispered one evening as they sat surrounded by leather-bound volumes in the Davis Estate Library. The parallels to her own life were hardly subtle. The Queen, with her crisp dresses and cold smiles, bore a striking resemblance to Jennifer, while the girl's determination mirrored Mary's own quiet rebellion. "The Queen can lock all the doors," Mary wrote in her careful script, "but she cannot lock my mind." During one of their clandestine lessons, Sarah discovered Mary hiding these stories beneath a loose floorboard in the library. "May I read them?" she asked gently. The child nodded, her face flushed with both fear and anticipation. When Sarah finished reading, tears glistened in her eyes. "Your mother had this gift too," she said softly. "Anna could weave words like magic." Unknown to Mary, pages from her notebook made their way to Mrs. Linda Brown. The teacher read them late one evening, marveling at the depth of emotion flowing from such young hands. Without hesitation, she copied Mary's best story and sent it to the Children's National Writing Competition, addressing the envelope with trembling fingers. "This child deserves to be heard," Mrs. Brown whispered to her empty classroom. When Robert Smith caught Mary scribbling during lunch break, he nearly teased her. Instead, curiosity won out. "What are you writing about?" he asked, his usual mischief momentarily subdued. "A girl who finds her voice," Mary replied simply, closing her notebook before he could see more. Each night, as Jennifer Johnson moved about downstairs, Mary continued her secret rebellion. Every word she wrote was an act of defiance against the silence imposed upon her. Her stories became her sanctuary, her characters' friends who understood her deepest longings, and somewhere in London, Mary's tale sat on a judge's desk, waiting to be discovered, much like the girl herself. Robert Smith slouched in the far corner of the Windmere Hollow Elementary Library, hiding from the afternoon mathematics lesson he dreaded. The mischievous boy had convinced Mrs. Linda Brown he needed to research a special project, though in truth, he simply couldn't face another hour of numbers that jumbled in his mind. Boredom drove him to explore the dusty shelves, and that's when he noticed it, a worn notebook wedged between two reference books, as if hastily hidden. Curiosity piqued, he pulled it free and recognized the careful handwriting immediately. "Mary Johnson," he whispered, running his fingers over the name inscribed on the first page. The same quiet girl he'd called Charity Case now had her private thoughts in his hands. Robert intended to find ammunition for more teasing, but as he read, something unexpected happened. Mary's stories transported him. Tales of brave children overcoming impossible odds, of finding voice when silenced, of seeing beauty in broken things. Her words flowed with an honesty that made his chest tighten. One passage struck him particularly hard. "The boy who laughs the loudest often cries when no one sees." Robert closed the notebook, his face burning. How could she understand what he'd never told anyone? His own struggle with reading, the way letters danced mockingly before his eyes, the shame that fueled his bullying. The next day at school, when Thomas and Peter began their usual taunting of Mary during lunch break, Robert surprised everyone. "Leave her alone," he said, stepping between them and the small, delicate girl. "Defending the Charity Case now?" Thomas sneered. "She has a name," Robert replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "And she writes better than any of us ever will." Mary looked up at him, confusion clear in her eyes. She said nothing, but her slight nod carried a weight of gratitude that made Robert stand taller. That evening, William Smith noticed his son's unusual quietness at dinner. "Everything all right at school?" he asked, straightening his tie, still dressed from the village council meeting. "Fine," Robert mumbled, pushing peas around his plate. He couldn't explain to his father, a man who valued reputation above all else, that he'd defended the very girl the council whispered about. The same girl whose stepmother, Jennifer Johnson, had made such a fuss about keeping home. Robert understood the dangerous position his newfound loyalty put him in. His father sat on the village council that had turned a blind eye to Jennifer's treatment of Mary. Yet something had fundamentally shifted inside him. Mary's words had found a home in his heart, and he couldn't unhear them. That night, he carefully returned the notebook to the library shelf, but added a small note: "Your stories matter. Keep writing." Autumn leaves crunched beneath Mary Johnson's feet as she hurried along the cobblestone path to the Davis estate. The village of Windmere Hollow had always thrived on whispers, but lately those whispers had grown louder, more insistent, swirling around like the fallen leaves in the October wind. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Higgins had murmured to another shopper at the village market. Sarah Davis and Anna Johnson were inseparable at school, until Jennifer came between them. The conversation had hushed when they noticed Mary nearby, but the damage was done. The child's ears had pricked up at the mention of her mother's name. Jennifer paced the sitting room that evening, her composed facade slipping as she snapped at Mary for the smallest infractions. "Stand up straight, speak clearly. A lady never fidgets." Her stepmother's anxiety was palpable, growing with each invitation Sarah received to community functions. The Harvest Festival Committee had broken tradition by asking Sarah to judge the annual baking competition, a role Jennifer had filled for 3 years running. When the wealthy widow arrived, dressed elegantly but modestly, the crowd parted. Some nodded respectfully, while others exchanged knowing glances. "She has no right," Jennifer hissed to William Smith at the festival. "After all these years, returning to stir up the past." William adjusted his tie nervously, glancing toward his son Robert, who was now often seen in Mary's company at school. "Perhaps some pasts need stirring," Mrs. Brown remarked, overhearing as she passed with a tray of apple tarts. The teacher's quiet defiance left Jennifer speechless, her cheeks flushed with indignation. That evening, Sarah found Mary hiding behind the refreshment table, clutching her notebook. "Would you like to read me what you've written?" she asked gently. The girl shook her head, too aware of the many eyes watching them. November brought the first snow, transforming Windmere Hollow into a postcard-perfect scene that belied the tensions simmering beneath its surface. In the warmth of the Davis Estate Library, Mary finally found the courage to share her story. A tale of a bird locked in a beautiful cage who dreamed of flying. Sarah listened, tears gathering in her eyes. When Mary finished, the woman reached for her hand. "Your mother wrote stories too," she said softly. "She had the same gift for finding truth in fiction." "Did you love her?" Mary asked suddenly. "Like a sister," Sarah answered, her voice breaking. "And I failed her once. I won't fail you." As they sat together, firelight dancing across their faces, the bond between them strengthened, forged in shared grief, sealed with words, and promising a future where secrets could no longer thrive in silence. The County Education Board's inspection came without warning on a Tuesday morning. 2 officials in pressed suits arrived at Windmere Hollow Elementary with clipboards and stern expressions, reviewing attendance records and speaking with staff. When they discovered Mary Johnson's peculiar attendance pattern, a mere 3 days followed by an extended illness, they requested a meeting with all involved parties. The school hall felt impossibly small as Jennifer Johnson sat rigidly across from Linda Brown and the board officials. Sarah Davis had somehow secured an invitation, sitting quietly in the corner, her presence making Jennifer's fingers twist nervously in her lap. "Mrs. Johnson," began the female inspector, "our records indicate your stepdaughter attended only briefly before this supposed illness. Yet no doctor's note was provided." Jennifer straightened her back. "Mary has always been delicate. I'm simply protecting her as any mother would." Linda couldn't remain silent any longer. "Mary showed remarkable aptitude during her brief time here," the teacher interjected, her voice steady despite the risk she was taking. "She completed reading assignments meant for children 2 years older and participated enthusiastically in all activities." "She exhausted herself," Jennifer countered sharply. "You wouldn't understand her condition." The male inspector leaned forward. "What condition exactly, Mrs. Johnson?" "Our records show no medical history supporting your claims." Jennifer's facade began to crack. "I don't need paperwork to know what's best for my child." "She's not fragile," Linda stated firmly. "She's bright and capable. I believe she's being deliberately kept from education." The room fell silent. Jennifer's cheeks flushed crimson as she realized the narrative she'd carefully constructed was unraveling. "You have no right to question my parenting," she hissed, but her voice wavered. Sarah finally spoke, her quiet words carrying across the room. "Anna would have wanted her daughter educated. You know that, Jennifer." The mention of Mary's deceased mother sent a visible shock through Jennifer. The officials exchanged glances, sensing deeper issues at play. "This goes beyond truancy," the female inspector noted, writing rapidly. "The council will need to review this case immediately." Words spread through Windmere Hollow like wildfire. By evening, villagers gathered in hushed groups outside the local shop, discussing the revelation. William Smith was seen rushing to the council building, his face grim with concern about the implications for the village's reputation. For Mary, waiting at home with no knowledge of the meeting, the future hung in balance. But for the first time, her silence was being questioned by those with the power to break it. Jennifer Johnson paced the living room floor, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a ticking clock. The county education board's visit had left her exposed, and now she was fighting back the only way she knew how, by attacking Sarah Davis. "That woman is filling Mary's head with nonsense," she declared to anyone who would listen. "She's always been trouble. Everyone knows about her scandalous past." The whispers spread through Windmere Hollow like wildfire. Old rumors resurfaced about Sarah's wealth, her years away from the village, and her mysterious return. Some claimed she'd been involved with a married man. Others suggested her fortune came from dubious sources. Jennifer skillfully fanned these flames, hoping to shift attention away from her own deceptions. But Sarah refused to cower. Standing in her library, surrounded by the books that had become Mary's sanctuary, she made her decision. "I've hidden in the shadows long enough," she told Mrs. Brown during a quiet afternoon visit. Anna would never have wanted her daughter to suffer the same limitations she did. Linda Brown nodded, remembering Anna Johnson's brilliant mind and how the village had stifled her ambitions years ago. Anna deserved better. Mary deserves better. The following day, a large envelope arrived at the Johnson household. Jennifer opened it with trembling fingers, her face draining of color as she read the contents. Mary's story, the one about a clever girl and a jealous queen, had won the National Writing Contest. It had been published anonymously in a prestigious children's literary journal, but the characters and setting were unmistakable to anyone familiar with Windmere Hollow. Mary herself only learned of her victory when Robert Smith ran up to her after school, waving a copy of the journal. "It's you! You're famous!" he exclaimed, his earlier taunts forgotten in his excitement. The little girl took the journal with wide eyes, scarcely believing her words had traveled beyond the confines of her notebooks. Her story, once a private act of defiance, had become public testimony. In the village shop, at the post office, and around dinner tables, people began discussing not just the scandal of Jennifer's lies, but the power of Mary's words. The fictional queen's attempts to keep the clever girl from learning struck too close to home for comfort. Sarah watched it all unfold from a distance, her heart both heavy and hopeful. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered to herself, touching the photograph of Anna she kept hidden in her desk drawer. "This time, the story will have a different ending." William Smith cornered Linda Brown in the empty classroom after the school day had ended. His imposing figure blocked the doorway as he adjusted his expensive tie, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This situation with the Johnson girl needs to disappear, Mrs. Brown. The council has enough on its plate without your crusade." Linda set down her marking pen, memories flooding back of another time, another Johnson woman she'd failed to protect. Anna's pleading eyes had haunted her dreams for years after she'd stayed silent. "I respected the council once," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I won't ignore a child being denied her birthright to education." William leaned closer. "Jennifer Johnson is a respected member of this community. These accusations could damage Windmere Hollow's reputation. Think about your position here. The threat hung in the air between them. Linda thought of her mortgage, her elderly mother who depended on her salary. Then she thought of Mary's eager face whenever a book was placed in her small hands. I've thought about my position for 20 years, William. I thought about it when I watched Anna's dreams crushed. I won't make the same mistake with her daughter. The councilman's face hardened. You're making a serious error in judgment. After he left, Linda sat alone, trembling but resolute. The next morning, she pinned a notice to the school bulletin board announcing a new after-hours reading circle for students seeking additional literary enrichment. When Thursday afternoon arrived, Linda arranged chairs in a circle, unsure if anyone would come. Mary arrived first, clutching her notebook, eyes wide with anticipation. Then came 3 more girls from families who couldn't afford tutors. To Linda's surprise, Robert Smith slipped in last, avoiding her gaze. My father doesn't know, he mumbled, taking a seat beside Mary. Linda nodded, understanding the courage this small rebellion required. We're reading stories today. Would anyone like to share? Mary's hand shot up, and the teacher smiled. For the next hour, the classroom transformed into a sanctuary where overlooked voices found strength. The shy girl who once pressed her face against the school gates now read with quiet confidence, her words captivating the small audience. Word spread. The following week, 10 children attended. Then, 15. Parents began to notice their daughters asking questions, speaking up at dinner tables, writing stories of their own. What began as a quiet act of resistance was blossoming into something larger. Linda watched her students, faces light up with discovery, and knew that some seeds once planted could not be stopped from growing toward the light. Spring blossomed across Windmere Hollow, painting the village in soft pinks and whites as the annual Scholar Showcase approached. The community hall buzzed with anticipation, its wooden benches filled to capacity with villagers curious about the young talents. Mary Johnson stood backstage, her small fingers trembling as she clutched her winning story pages. "Remember to breathe," Mrs. Linda Brown whispered, straightening the collar of Mary's freshly pressed dress, a gift from Sarah Davis that made the child look almost transformed. The teacher's eyes shone with unmistakable pride. Your words deserve to be heard. When Mary's name was announced, the hall fell silent. She walked to the center stage with measured steps, her heart pounding against her ribs. The spotlight felt warm against her face as she unfolded her pages. For a moment, she caught sight of Jennifer in the 3rd row, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting nervously around the room. "My story is called The Queen's Shadow," Mary began, her voice initially small, but growing stronger with each word. She read of a young girl trapped in silence by a jealous queen who feared the child's light might outshine her own. The metaphor was thinly veiled, yet powerful in its simplicity. As the tale unfolded, the audience leaned forward in their seats. Even Robert Smith, who once mocked her mercilessly, sat transfixed, his usual restlessness replaced by rapt attention. Village council members exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing their own complicity in the story's undercurrents. Jennifer's composure cracked visibly when Mary reached the climax, where the child in the story finally found her voice through written words that traveled beyond the Queen's walls. Her stepmother's face flushed with shame, unable to hide her recognition in the narrative. From the back of the hall, Sarah watched, tears streaming unchecked down her face. This moment represented everything her dear friend Anna had dreamed for her daughter. A chance to shine, to be heard, to matter. The weight of years of secrecy pressed against her chest. When thunderous applause erupted at the story's conclusion, Mary searched the crowd until she found Sarah's gaze. Something passed between them, a recognition, a question, an answer long overdue. Later, in the quiet corner of the emptying hall, Sarah took Mary's hands in hers. Your mother would have been so proud, she whispered. Anna was my dearest friend in this world. Mary's eyes widened. You knew my mother well? More than that, Sarah replied, her voice breaking. I was named your godmother, Mary, in secret, before she passed. A promise I couldn't fulfill until now. The revelation hung between them, a bridge spanning years of silence and separation, finally connecting their shared past to a future suddenly rich with possibility. The revelation that Sarah Davis was Mary's godmother spread through Windmere Hollow like wildfire. Villagers gathered in hushed circles outside the local shops, their whispers creating a tapestry of speculation and shock. For years, Sarah had been viewed as merely an eccentric, wealthy woman, but now her connection to the Johnson family reframed every interaction, every kindness she had shown the child. Jennifer Johnson found herself increasingly isolated. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained crumbled as neighbors who once smiled politely now averted their eyes. In desperation, she called an impromptu meeting at the village hall, claiming she had only kept Mary from school to protect her from undue influence and radical ideas. I've only ever wanted what's best for my stepdaughter, Jennifer insisted, her voice cracking with practiced emotion. But the assembled villagers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unconvinced. Mrs. Brown sat in the back row, arms crossed, her expression firm with quiet triumph. The teacher had witnessed too many of Jennifer's manipulations to be swayed now. Meanwhile, Mary found herself at the center of a quiet revolution. Children who had once avoided her now sought her company during breaks in the schoolyard. Parents who had previously accepted the status quo began questioning why certain children received opportunities while others didn't. You change things, Robert Smith told her one afternoon as they sat beneath an oak tree near the schoolhouse. The boy who had once called her charity case now looked at her with genuine admiration. My father says the council's never been questioned like this before. Mary smiled, still shy but growing more confident each day. I just wanted to learn, she said simply. Robert hesitated, then confessed in a low voice. I've always had trouble with reading. That's why I was so mean. I was jealous that you could do it so well. The girl considered this revelation carefully. Without judgment or mockery, she pulled out one of her books and opened to the first page. Would you like me to help you? She offered. 3 times a week after that, they would meet in the quiet corner of the schoolyard. Mary patiently guided Robert through simple texts, celebrating each small victory. Their friendship, born from adversity, became a symbol of the changes sweeping through Windmere Hollow. Sarah watched these developments from a respectful distance, her heart swelling with pride. You're so much like your mother, she told Mary one evening at the estate library. Anna would have changed this village too, if she'd been given the chance. Mary nodded, understanding now that her battle was not just her own. It was the continuation of something that had begun long before her. What had begun as Linda Brown's quiet act of defiance, small reading circles tucked away during lunch hours, had blossomed into something Windmere Hollow hadn't seen in generations. The teachers' accidental gatherings now drew nearly half the school's children, with girls arriving earliest, books clutched to their chests like precious treasures. I never meant to start a movement, Linda confessed to Sarah Davis one afternoon as they watched the children filing into the classroom. I just couldn't bear to see another child like Mary silenced. The ripples spread beyond the schoolhouse walls. Parents began questioning traditions that had seemed immutable for decades. Letters poured into the village council, hesitant at first, then growing bolder, describing how children, especially daughters, had been held back from their potential. William Smith shifted uncomfortably in his high-backed chair during the emergency council meeting. The chamber buzzed with tension as he cleared his throat. These are isolated incidents being exaggerated, he insisted, avoiding the piercing gaze of the other council members. Mrs. Brown has overstepped her role as educator. But Robert, his son, had already changed allegiances. That morning, the boy had stood before his father in their dining room, shoulders squared. "Mary taught me more about courage in one term than I've learned my whole life," he declared. "And Mrs. Brown is the only teacher who didn't give up on me when I struggled with reading." The council chamber fell silent when Sarah Davis entered, her presence commanding respect despite years of isolation. Behind her walked 3 other mothers, each carrying testimonies about Jennifer Johnson's systematic efforts to prevent girls from advancing in school. "For too long, we've allowed pride and appearance to matter more than truth," Sarah stated, her voice steady. "Jennifer Johnson has used her position on this council to perpetuate the same injustice that was done to Anna years ago." The evidence was damning. Records of Jennifer's interference with school enrollment, documentation of her false claims about Mary's health, and witness statements from families who'd been pressured to keep their daughters from pursuing certain subjects. By evening, the council had voted. Jennifer's leadership role was stripped away, her influence crumbling like the facade she'd maintained for years. As she stormed from the chamber, her face flushed with humiliation. William Smith watched her go, suddenly aware of his own complicity in maintaining the village's rigid hierarchy. "Perhaps," he murmured to nobody in particular. "It's time Windmere Hollow remembered that tradition without justice is merely oppression wearing a respectable mask." Jennifer Johnson stood at the edge of Windmere Hollow, her suitcases packed and loaded into the back of a taxi. The morning fog clung to the village like a shroud, obscuring the future that awaited her beyond its boundaries. Her carefully constructed life had crumbled beneath the weight of exposed lies and manipulations. No amount of perfectly pressed clothes or well-rehearsed excuses could shield her now. From the window of the Davis estate, Mary watched her stepmother's departure. The little girl's heart was a complicated tangle of emotions. Relief that the constant fear had lifted, yet sadness for what might have been. Jennifer had never loved her, not truly, but Mary couldn't help wondering if things might have been different under other circumstances. "Are you all right?" Sarah Davis asked softly, placing a gentle hand on Mary's shoulder. Mary nodded, her eyes still fixed on the disappearing vehicle. "I didn't want her to be hurt. I just wanted to go to school." "The truth often hurts before it heals," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned this lesson firsthand. As Jennifer's taxi disappeared around the bend, the village seemed to exhale collectively. The scandal had shaken Windmere Hollow to its core, forcing many to confront uncomfortable truths about power and silence. Some whispered that Jennifer had family in London, others that she would start fresh where nobody knew her name. Whatever the case, her shadow no longer darkened Mary's future. Sarah, once the mysterious wealthy widow on the hill, stepped fully into the light. She filed the proper guardianship papers, officially becoming what Anna Johnson had intended years ago, Mary's protector and guide. The villagers, who had once avoided Sarah's gaze at market day, now greeted her with cautious warmth, curious about the woman who had risked everything for a child not her own. Together, Sarah and Mary turned their attention to the grand library at the Davis estate. They dusted shelves, repaired broken chairs, and sorted through hundreds of books. What had once been Sarah's private sanctuary became something new, a place where village children gathered after school hours, their eager fingers tracing words on pages, their minds expanding beyond Windmere Hollow's boundaries. "My mother would have loved this," Mary said one afternoon, watching a group of girls huddled over a volume of poetry. Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She does love it, Mary. Through you, she sees everything." The library became more than books and knowledge. It became a testament to what courage could build from the ashes of fear. And though the path to this moment had been painful, Mary understood that some battles, however costly, were worth fighting. Mary Johnson's story, The Girl Behind the Gate, arrived in the mail with a blue ribbon attached and a letter from the National Young Writers Association. The tale of a young protagonist overcoming a controlling guardian had resonated with judges across England, earning not just recognition, but also a modest cash prize of £50. News spread through Windmere Hollow like wildfire. "Did you hear about the Johnson girl?" whispered mothers at the market. "Her story about that wicked stepmother character? Rather familiar, isn't it?" The village newspaper ran a front-page feature, printing excerpts that made many adults shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Mary's thinly veiled fiction exposed truths the community had long ignored: how girls were often discouraged from pursuing education, how their voices were silenced in the name of tradition and knowing one's place. Mrs. Brown proudly displayed a copy in her classroom. "This is what happens when we nurture talent instead of stifling it," she told her students, her eyes finding Robert Smith, who nodded in understanding. The boy who once mocked Mary now championed her work among their classmates. Sarah Davis hosted a small celebration at her estate library, where Mary read passages to a gathering of supportive villagers. The child stood tall, despite her small stature, her voice growing stronger with each word. Several council members attended, noticeably without William Smith, who claimed prior engagements. Not everyone celebrated, however. A faction of villagers, mostly those with close ties to Jennifer, began questioning Sarah's influence. "That Davis woman is using the child to settle old scores," muttered one shopkeeper, filling her head with ideas above her station. "She's always been odd, living alone in that big house," another agreed. "What business does she have interfering with how children are raised?" Sarah weathered these whispers with quiet dignity. Walking through the village square one afternoon, she overheard such comments and paused, turning to face the gossipers directly. "I wear my mistakes openly now," she told them, her voice steady. "Years ago, I stayed silent when Anna Johnson needed me most. I watched her dreams crushed by those who claimed to know better. I won't make that mistake again with her daughter." The wealthy woman touched the silver locket at her throat, a gift from Anna years before. "Redemption isn't pretending the past never happened. It's transforming yesterday's pain into tomorrow's hope." She continued her walk, head high, leaving stunned silence in her wake. That evening, 3 more girls from the village arrived at her library, books in hand, seeking the same opportunity Mary had found. Summer arrived in Windmere Hollow with a golden warmth that seemed to mirror the transformation taking place within the village itself. The schoolhouse, once a forbidden dream for many children, now stood with its doors flung wide, welcoming students who had previously been kept at home for reasons of delicacy or family tradition. Mrs. Linda Brown walked through her classroom with quiet pride, watching as twice as many girls filled the seats compared to the previous year. Her teaching methods, encouraging questions, valuing creativity, and treating each child as capable, had become the standard across the school. The stern yet compassionate teacher had fought hard for these changes, standing firm against pressure from council members like William Smith, who had initially resisted disrupting the status quo. "We're not just teaching facts," she explained to a group of visiting parents. "We're nurturing minds that will shape our village's future." Mary Johnson, who had once pressed her face against cold iron gates in desperate longing, now moved through the schoolyard with quiet confidence. The small, delicate girl had blossomed into someone other children looked to for guidance. Her notebooks, once hidden treasures, were now shared openly as she led a writing circle under the old oak tree during lunch breaks. "Everyone has a story worth telling," she told a shy newcomer, her voice gentle but assured. "Even the quietest voice deserves to be heard." Robert Smith, once her tormentor and now her staunchest ally, nodded in agreement. The boy had transformed as much as the village itself, his mischievous energy now channeled into helping younger students with their reading, skills he had improved through Mary's patient tutoring. Sarah Davis visited the school regularly, her mysterious reputation replaced by respect as she donated books and supplies. The wealthy woman would watch from the doorway, her eyes finding Mary among the students, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips as she witnessed the fulfillment of her promise to Anna Johnson. The old boundaries that had divided Windmere Hollow, between those who learned and those who served, between boys who led and girls who followed, faded like morning mist under summer sun. Children from all families sat together, their voices mingling in the warm air as they debated ideas and shared dreams. In this new atmosphere of possibility, Mary found herself not just accepted, but valued. The village that had once tried to silence her now listened when she spoke, her quiet courage lighting a path that others eagerly followed toward a future where no child would stand outside looking in. The autumn air carried the scent of cinnamon and fallen leaves as Windmere Hollow gathered for its annual harvest assembly. The community hall buzzed with anticipation, wooden benches filled with villagers whose faces reflected both curiosity and lingering resistance to change. Mary Johnson stood at the podium, transformed from the timid girl who once pressed her face against iron gates. Her carefully brushed hair caught the light from tall windows, and her eyes, once downcast, now surveyed the room with quiet confidence. Before her sat the entire village council, including William Smith, whose stern expression couldn't quite mask his discomfort. "Last autumn," Mary began, her voice soft yet carrying to every corner, "I wasn't allowed to learn. I wasn't allowed to dream." Her words hung in the air, simple yet devastating in their truth. "But today, I stand here because one person believed in me, then another and another." The young girl's gaze found Robert in the crowd. The boy who had once mocked her now nodded encouragingly, his own journey from tormentor to ally mirroring the village's gradual awakening. "Education isn't just about books," Mary continued, fingers tracing the edge of her speech paper. "It's about having a voice when others want silence. It's about seeing doors where others build walls." In the front row, Sarah Davis sat perfectly still, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. The wealthy woman who had once been shunned by this very community now commanded a different kind of attention: respect. Her hand clutched a small locket containing a faded photograph of Anna Johnson, Mary's mother, whose own dreams had been crushed by the same traditions Mary now challenged. "My mother never got to finish school," Mary said, her voice wavering slightly. "But her story didn't end there. It continues through me, through every child who's been told they're too fragile, too poor, or too different to learn." Mrs. Brown watched from near the side entrance, her professional demeanor briefly cracking to reveal fierce pride. The teacher had risked everything to stand by Mary, and now witnessed the harvest of that courage. As Mary finished speaking, the hall remained silent for 3 heartbeats before erupting in applause. Sarah rose to her feet, tears finally spilling freely. Through the blur, she could almost see Anna standing beside her goddaughter, the promise made long ago finally fulfilled. The village council members exchanged glances, knowing that Windmere Hollow would never return to what it had been. The little girl who had once whispered her plea at a garden gate had found her voice, and in doing so had given voice to countless others. The journey had changed Mary Johnson in ways both visible and invisible. Her posture had straightened, her voice had found its strength, and her eyes now held a quiet confidence that belied her young years. Though the memories of standing outside the iron gate in the rain would never completely fade, they had transformed from wounds into wisdom. Sarah Davis watched her goddaughter with quiet pride as Mary helped younger children with their reading in the newly established community library. The space, once the exclusive domain of the wealthy, now buzzed with the energy of children from all corners of Windmere Hollow. Sarah often found herself touching the framed photograph of Anna that sat on her desk, whispering, "She has your spirit, old friend." The village itself had undergone a metamorphosis. Mrs. Linda Brown had been appointed head mistress of the expanded school, her teaching methods becoming the foundation for a new approach to education that valued curiosity over conformity. Even Robert Smith, once the classroom troublemaker, had found purpose as a peer tutor, his father William reluctantly acknowledging the positive changes in both his son and the community. Jennifer had not returned to Windmere Hollow. Occasional letters arrived from Mary, tentative bridges across a gulf of hurt and misunderstanding. Mary answered each one, her responses measured but never cruel. She understood now that fear often masqueraded as strength, and that her stepmother had been trapped in her own way. "Do you ever miss how things were before?" Robert asked Mary one afternoon as they shelved books together. Mary considered this, running her fingers along the spine of a volume of poetry. "I miss the quiet sometimes," she admitted, "but not the silence." He nodded, understanding the difference. On the anniversary of her first day of school, Mary stood before the village council, no longer trembling but poised and purposeful. She presented a proposal for a scholarship fund for children facing barriers to education. The council members, including a humbled William Smith, voted unanimously to approve it. The path forward would never be entirely smooth. Old prejudices died slowly, and change required constant vigilance. But in the warm glow of the setting sun, as Mary walked home alongside Sarah, their shadows stretched long across the cobblestones of Windmere Hollow. She knew that some victories, once won, could never be entirely undone. The village had been transformed, not by grand gestures or sudden wealth, but by the persistent courage of a little girl who had dared to speak the simplest of truths, that every child deserves the chance to learn, to grow, and to become more than what others might decide for them.